Hello, dear friends. Welcome to an SFC Films event. Today we have a special event prepared for you. We have some wonderful filmmakers who's going to talk to us about making optimistic science fiction. So just briefly, for those who are new, I'm Masood from SFC Films. If you're not familiar with SFC Films, it's a membership website to grow a community who love optimistic science fiction and space documentaries. So basically, positive space films, and also to help bring more positive space films to our screen. We are growing a catalog of optimistic science fiction and space documentary films who are made by yourselves, the wonderful indie filmmaker community, but also the people who are not filmmakers who are also contributing. Thank you so much, guys. We organize educational events such as this, and also we support filmmakers with the SFC Film Festival, which is coming up on October the 9th. So just briefly, this particular event is to help you make your films better for the film festival. So don't forget the deadline is the equinox, the September equinox, which is the 23rd of September. And then we're going to announce the winners, and we're going to have the film festival on the 9th of October. Let's introduce these wonderful filmmakers. First, we have Elliot and Zander Weaver, who are the creators of Cosmos. Then we have HaZ Dulull, who is the creator of The Beyond. And we have Adam Stern with his wonderful film FTL, or Faster Than Light short film. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So just briefly, I'm going to just some terminology in terms of what optimistic science fiction is and what space documentary is. So I'm going to refer to this interchangeably. I'm just going to call them space films. Optimistic sci-fi is like your Star Treks and Babylon 5 and the Orville, the ones that say that there is hope for the future, not the ones that say we're going to kill ourselves or we're going to die. So and also space documentary are space sciences, anything to do with space exploration. So I use this interchangeably. And guys, refer to your space documentaries, Elliot and Zander. I know you guys have done a bunch of films on the Apollo program, so please feel free to refer to those. So I'm going to just throw in some questions. Feel free to discuss with us what you think that will help us make our optimistic science fiction or space documentaries better. So first of all, why do you make space films? Let's start with HaZ. HaZ, go for it.
You gotta set the example.
Go for it.
I think for me, I make optimistic science fiction or space programs is, first, I'm fascinated by it personally. As a filmmaker, I always find I want to tell stories that I'm personally interested in or intrigued or have an attachment to. But the second thing is, everything stems down to humanity. Especially when you're talking about science fiction, it all stems down to humanity, like where we are today and where we are going to be in the future. And that all boils down to basic space exploration. So that's one of the reasons why I make it. Fascination, but at the same time, exploring where humanity could go in the most positive way.
I think the same, really. I think we make optimistic science fiction films because they're the kinds of movies and content we enjoy the most. We've loved sci-fi forever. We love watching Star Wars as kids, and that's never really left us. And I think when you're a filmmaker, I guess you gravitate often towards the kind of content that you enjoy watching yourself. And I think to have the opportunity to make something hopeful and optimistic and pay that forward to more viewers is a real opportunity and privilege. So I think that's why we do it, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. And sci-fi as a whole just has such a great scope for telling so many different kinds of stories. And although, we enjoy the kind of dystopian future stuff that we might see, it's great fun as well. There's something wonderful about creating inspirational content that might actually inspire people to go on and make science fiction, science fact in the future. You never know.
Exactly. Wonderful. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have the advantage of being able to follow these tremendous filmmakers and what they've already said, and just sort of say ditto. I mean, very similar in most ways. It's funny. I don't think I set out to intentionally to be an optimistic science fiction filmmaker, but that being said, I was raised certainly on a steady diet of Star Trek. It's still one of my favorite things in the world. And the idea, and, you know, Roddenberry's general idea and philosophy that there is hope for the future. And you know, the idea that when I was, as a kid, I was watching Star Trek and seeing these worlds where it was sort of irrelevant, you know, within humanity, what your background was, what your color was, where you came from. They were all just members of one sort of human community. I think that really stuck with me. And so the idea that, you know, now we may have the opportunity to reach outwards from there in a positive way with hope certainly is a bit of a bomb to some of the things that are going on in the world today. And it's nice to think that, you know, maybe we'll get it all together and be able to sort of go from there. So, yeah, I mean, I also wanted to make and want to make films that I want to see. And, you know, certainly that's where I come from. You know, a love of science fiction, a love of stories set in space, and a love of the idea that, you know, maybe we'll make it.
I mean, just following on from that question, and like I've noticed that basically all the films that I mentioned, you've all got in there aliens that are friendly or aliens that help us out and things like that. What is the likelihood of aliens who come and we contact are going to be friendly?
Well, I mean, for me, like, obviously, no spoiler alert on my film if you haven't seen it, anyone.
Yep.
But like, you know, I got kind of bored with the idea of seeing Hollywood always like showing aliens are the bad guys that want to invade us. And although there may be some truth with the way you look at species, because species as a whole, even humanity as a whole, we kind of want to protect our species and we'll do whatever it takes to protect. And even though that means trampling on the small ant farm to, you know, to make way to build houses and all of that stuff. And I know the Weaver brothers are pretty strong on this because you guys are vegans. So I'm interested to hear what you guys say, which is a very important thing, by the way, everyone. I think for me, like, there's no reason why aliens or intelligent that we make contact with out there may not have the same goals as us, which is just to reach out and say, hello, there's someone else out there. You know, that could be the core principal reason of why they're making contact. It may not be because they want to invade another planet or take resources like we see in a lot of the movies. It could just be a hello. If you think about the first telecommunication, when the phones were first built, the first thing they said was hello on the other end of the line, yeah, right? Or when you were a kid and you had walkie-talkies and like you each other, and the first thing was hello. You can hear you say hello. So I think that is the main principal core of the communication with extraterrestrials out there, is to just make that first contact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that notion of like them coming here to take resources from us, there's actually more resources in space than there is on Earth.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I think also that there's something about the notion of space travel. I'm hopeful that it is like a unifying experience, that it's such a, you know, the scale of the universe and the cosmos as a whole. I'm hopeful that it would pull a species together. And I think as we progress, you know, as any species progresses, I suppose, if there are other alien species out there, I would assume that similar to what we're doing, we're always striving to better ourselves. We're continually trying to understand and be more benevolent to everybody, in effect, and also the planet as a whole. And so I'm hopeful that if you've taken that step to be able to travel across, you know, star systems, right, that you're not a kind of predatory species that's out to destroy. You know, you've actually come together and you're unified in your quest across the universe. Maybe that's just the optimist in me, but that's what I'm hoping.
Like, if you think about it, it's very unlikely that sort of a hive mind species would develop science and conversation to be able to, you know, engineer space travel. The idea that some species could actually develop space travel and survive the long distances, they're going to require like a scientific,
communal
civilization, and that will obviously result in an understanding of peace and communication, like Has said, you know, the willingness to just reach out and present yourself and say hello.
Yeah, I love the idea also that perhaps what's just waiting, because, you know, all the theories as far as whether it's, you know, zoo theory or any of the other, you know, the paradoxes about, well, why haven't we seen or met anyone yet? You know, I certainly love the idea that it will take that moment, you know, of us reaching a certain technological threshold to just unlock the door to recognize what's out there, because, you know, it might not be anything we understand currently. We might need a certain level of technology simply to see what else is out there, or to understand layers of how the universe works and all of these things. So, you know, I love the idea that maybe it's just a matter of us, you know, coming out of adolescence as a species in order to sort of join a greater community. I think stories like that are fantastic. Yeah,
I love it.
That's
Yeah,
great.
definitely, man.
So what are the, in terms of filmmaking and making your films, what challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? Or if you didn't overcome them, what would you suggest other people to do to overcome those challenges? So maybe we start with Adam this time.
Yeah, just go to switch the order up.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't just get to sort of ride on your coattails all the way through. So yeah, no, I mean, great questions. And I think the thing that, you know, for me, and I also, you know, should, you know, I feel like I should mention that, you know, I'm sort of sitting at a table with Has and the Weaver brothers, who have both made these terrific features. I'm on my way to making my first one right now, but FTL is a short. That being said, you know, it was certainly designed as an ambitious short. And I think that for me, the biggest challenges and the things that continue to be what I'm trying to learn the most about are very specific to, you know, story and character and confidence and trust and directing and those kinds of things. I think the important thing always, whether it's science fiction filmmaking or not, is to find the emotional core and heart of your story. And all the other stuff is great. And I mean, I'm saying that from someone that spent years and years in visual effects, as I know Has has, and you know, and seeing what you both have done with your features. And I love, by the way, in Cosmos, you know, that, you know, it's great filmmaking, but you know, at the core of the whole thing was the relationship between the three guys, which I thought was terrific. And I think that's what's important. You know, the challenge is telling a story that's relatable, that resonates because the characters are taking you through the story. And that's something that, you know, I am absolutely still pushing to learn more about, to try to understand where the hearts of things are. And that's why, to me, Star Trek was always such a great thing, because it's always about that. You know, spacecraft are cool and aliens are cool, and the idea of first contact is just so, there's such a sense of wonder, which is amazing. But in the end, you know, it's seeing it through the eyes of your characters, and always to keep that in mind. I think that's what will resonate with audiences, and that's the most important and probably most difficult challenge, at least for me.
I think you've got that one right there.
Definitely.
Thank you for your compliments there.
Oh no, I loved it. Yeah. No, I want to make a film the way you guys made a film. I mean, I love the idea that, you know, you took some black magic cameras and you just did it. And I think that maybe that's the biggest challenge also, not to sort of keep talking, but just to sort of get out the door and to make your film. You know, you hear that all the time, but it's really, really true.
Yeah. And have fun with it, because I can see like the behind the scenes that you guys did on your film Cosmos. Like, I had so much fun watching those behind the scenes. And you can tell that you guys are just in the middle of the night in some like car park area for that scene with that big dolly shot where you're rushing up towards the guys that lift the back of the car car boot. And you can just tell you guys are having fun, even though it must be freaking cold out there. But you guys are just having fun because you love making it, and that's reflective in the final picture. You know, so that's like kudos to you. And I think that is the spirit of independent filmmaking in general, is getting a bunch of people together to like, you've all got the same vision. I guess it's my turn since I'm speaking.
Go for it. Yep.
I mean, budget is always the big thing. There's always the challenge. You know, even if you're making a big TV show, you're still going to have an issue with the budget. So I'm not going to talk too much about budgets. I think that's like an obvious thing. I think for me, if I was to find something a little bit more unique on both of my feature films, The Beyond and Origin Unknown, it was, but specifically The Beyond, because we're talking optimistic science fiction here and indie filmmaking, was making a movie that you know could be sold. So when you're making, you know, when I made my first short films, you know, like Project Kronos, which is what The Beyond stemmed from. It was great. I didn't have to worry about the market. I didn't have to worry. I just made something because I just wanted to make something on my laptop and put it out there, and it went viral. It got its recognition. But when you're making a feature film, it's a little bit of a different bag, because not only do you have to do all the things that that we're saying, which is storytelling and directing and keeping the cost, being sensible of your costs, but also every decision you make, from your shot composition to your editorial decision to your storytelling to who you cast sometimes, from micro indie film, cast doesn't really matter too much, but you have to make sure that the concept is saleable. And, the first thing that I always overcome that challenge is, if I can pitch my movie in 30 seconds without going through the entire story, like a log line, but succinctly, then I know that there's a chance this thing could sell, because it's so easy to pitch, right? That doesn't mean you have to dumb down your story. No, I mean, science fiction is cerebral. The type of films I make and films that you guys make, it's very cerebral, and that's optimistic science fiction. It's cerebral science fiction. But how do you pitch that? The other thing is, you put all your blood and sweat and soul into making a feature film, no matter how long it takes. The big thing is the minute it gets into a distributor's hands, how do you manage that? And the challenge that I found was which distributor to go with. Am I prepared to recut my film to fit the market, to fit a distributor? And these are decisions you gotta have prepared from day one. You don't want to spend 2 years or a year or however long it takes to make a movie, and then you find a perfect distributor, and the distributor's like, this is great, but you made that film 2 years ago or a year ago or however long it takes. Well, things are changing the market now. What we thought worked in the market doesn't really work now, and you had to be prepared to make those cuts or changes, or amend your story, or amend the way you present the film. And for the Beyond, the biggest challenge was, was this to be positioned as a found footage film? No, because it's not a Blumhouse Paranormal Activity movie. But at the same time, there's no big name cast in it. So it's not is it a sci-fi thriller? Because there's no big name. Is it going to be a B movie? And these are all the things that goes on and everyone here are directors, writers, and producers. We make movies, we finance our own projects, right? We're producers, and we have to think about that. And the way I would overcome that is, it's a very scary thing, but screen test your film. I think the best decision I did was screen test my film. I have to admit, I didn't want to do it. I was like, I don't want to watch my film and rip it to pieces. No way. But my producing partner was like, look, just get a room, get a variety of people. Don't just get sci-fi film goers. Just get a random people that are, non-biased, and just sit there, watch the movie, and then tell them to fill in a scorecard so that there's no pressure. And then I remember getting the scorecards back, and it wasn't scorecards 10 out of 10. It was more what they loved and what they didn't understand, as opposed to what they didn't like, right? Because it's subjective. We all know art is subjective. But what was very interesting was you get all sorts of notes, okay? It's it's subjective. You get someone say, I don't like her accent, or I don't like her hair, or I don't believe that would happen in a wormhole, whatever, right? But the way I overcame those notes was to collate all the common thread. And there was 2 common threads that came up in the Beyond screening. The first one was, and this was the first cut, so this is obviously not the cut that's out now, obviously. But the first cut was, it looked too good to be a documentary. We had these gorgeous visual effects shots rendered in Maya and Houdini and Compton Nuke, photorealistic 4K renders. And then you cut to talking head documentary, and you cut to visceral documentary type shots. So people were confused. And I remember talking to a few people, they're like, well, if you watch a Blumhouse film, the minute you watch a Blumhouse film and it's a found footage, a found footage film is a found footage film. So it comes up with the tape, it's play, little text going, this is the following is found footage, right? Like Blair Witch. So you know what you're up for. But with my first cut, it started up this beautiful, epic shot of the spaceship, and then we cut to talking heads. And they're like, what are we watching here? So that was one. The second thing was, so that was the visual effects were too good, basically. And the second one was, who are we following? Who is, and Adam, you touched on this in terms of characters and having your characters, something that you can relate to. And the problem I found with mine, because it was a documentary, I'm covering everyone, covering the scientists, the astronauts, the physicists, the journalists, the media, the public. And it was a bit of whoa, it was a bit of a mashup of cool stuff. So I decided I had to pick who we're following, and that ended up doing potential reshoots, right? Now, reshoots are not a dirty word these days. Reshoots is can make your film good. So, one advice I always say is always budget for some reshoots or additional coverage that you may miss on the day. But here's the thing. the way I fixed the visual effects problem on my film, to make it more documentary, was I shot all the visual effects footage. I played them all back on my Mac Retina screen, and I shot it all back in camera, and using like rack focusing. So then when you cut the Blackmagic handheld shot from the screens to the handheld of live action, it felt like it was shot by the same DP. Now, I would never have come up with that idea. I mean, it sounds kind of genius now, but at the time, I'm like, oh my God, is this going to work? But the cool thing is, I would never have came up with that idea if I wasn't forced to think like that. So you're going to come up with problems, you're going to come up with obstacles, and part of filmmaking is to figure it out, but at the same time, preserve your story and your vision. Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, Haz, what was your pitch for The Beyond?
The elevator pitch?
Yep, the elevator pitch.
Oh, let's see if I can remember it now. I think it's basically, in the near future, we send advanced astronauts through a wormhole. They come back several years later with memories of making first contact, and that message could potentially save humanity for all we know it. And that was it. Nice. So it's very vague, but at the same time, you're like, what? I want to watch it. That's the thing. I didn't go with, well, we start off the astronaut going through the wormhole, they come, and that's how I used to pitch, man. I used to like tell the whole freaking story, and now I'm like, no, just the trailer, pitch the trailer. Yep. That's the way I would do it.
For us, the nature of the way that we made Cosmos, for anyone who doesn't know who's watching, it was a no-budget movie. We self-funded it, and it cost about $7,000 over the course of about 5 years. So we had very little to work with. So the obvious challenge for us was budgetary, like Haz has touched on. And having the sticking power to kind of stay with it and making sure you have that passion. And actually, I think this comes back around to what Adam was talking about, which is making sure that the story that you've written and the story that you've come up with is something you're actually really passionate about. I think if you're on the fence when it comes to indie filmmaking, you're going to be really pushed during this whole process. It's going to be tough. You're going to hit walls, and there's going to be challenges, and you're going to question why you're even doing it in the first place. And if you've gone off the back of something that you're not 100% behind, then I think you're gonna struggle with that process. So I think finding the kind of core of the story that you're telling, focusing on people, because it doesn't matter how spectacular things get and how many effects there are in it. It all comes down, like Adam was saying, to the character and to the people. And I think if you've got that really clear in your mind and you have that passion and drive for it, it doesn't really matter what obstacle you face. You'll find the way around it. It's the why and the how question. If you know why clearly, then you'll figure out the how. It will come. So that's what I'd say. I think. Would you agree?
I would. I think you put that very well. I don't know. I can now say what Adam said earlier, which is like ditto. Like I said the same. Yeah, spot on.
So if you had to choose 3 elements of a good space films. So the ones that you've already mentioned, I mean, those ones are given, like got to have a good story, got to have a good pitch and a budget and things like that. What other 3 elements would you choose that, would you say are very important for a good space films? So in terms of both the narrative seriously. And the documentary part, or maybe say for both.
I think. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on, Haz.
No, I'm probably going to say the same what you're going to say, but even like with documentaries, it really is the person you're following. In a narrative, it's the character you're following, right? You got to invest in that character, regardless of what the situation is. Why should we sit through 90 minutes or however long to follow this character get to the end of the movie? Like, what is the investment in us in that character? And it really all boils down to the people.
I think that's true. I was going to say, I also think it's something that's really, it's maybe not unique to the sci-fi genre. In fact, it's not, because it obviously happens in other genres, but also sci-fi is guilty of doing what I'm about to say, which is, but I think good sci-fi doesn't dumb down. It doesn't dumb down for its audience. I think you can get just all out, indulgent, enjoyable sci-fi that's just there to be blockbuster entertainment, and that's fantastic. But I also think sci-fi, when done well, when done in a cerebral sense, I think that's appreciated by the audience, because a lot of sci-fi viewers are deep thinkers and they're dreamers, and they imagine what the world out is, you know, the universe like is out there, and all the opportunities and possibilities. And I think when you present a story that, I think Chris Nolan, for example, is really good at this. He expects you to keep up. He expects you to be paying attention and listen, and he doesn't dumb his movies down. And if you don't want to keep up or pay attention, he doesn't pander to you. He just says, well, maybe your movie's not for me. And so I think science fiction can do that really well. I think people are often smarter than a lot of studios and directors and producers give them credit for. And I think you'll be rewarded if you treat your audience with, you know, with some respect.
I think that kind of loops back to what Has said about the commercial potential for a project, because obviously there is, you know, great pressure on a project to earn back. Obviously, it's money, to make money. That's the whole point of like the business side of this thing that we do, and it can be very tempting to look at things and go, you know, am I going to cut people out because you know, that's a bit hard to follow, or this, that, and the other. It's very, very tempting to try and kind of knock the corners off the story that you're telling. But I think we live in a world now, which is a wonderful world for filmmakers, where people can find your content and an audience will find your film. And I think we are entering, or we're probably already in a phase of movie storytelling where you can go for it. You can push the boundaries. You can keep those corners on your movie, because I think the right people will find your film. And the kind of organic nature of the way that movies are viewable now with video on demand and all sorts, the more people who rate the film a certain way, it will, you know, algorithms will attract the same type of viewer. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be afraid to kind of stick to the truth of what the story you're trying to tell, really. Even if it feels like you could broaden the audience a bit by tweaking a few things, I think we can go for it now.
Yeah, I would just chime in and sort of second what everyone has said so far. But I think that, you know, the idea of, you know, one of my litmus tests certainly is when I go through Netflix or, you know, Apple TV or Amazon or any of these, and I'm scanning through and there's stuff I want to watch. And I mean, it's a very easy test to sort of look for films that I want to watch and see what's out there and how that relates to the things that I want to make, because I very much am wanting to make things that I would want to go see. And I think, you know, as has been mentioned, the idea of, you know, that there are people that have a thirst for science fiction films that don't necessarily pander to an intentionally extremely broad commercial audience that may want to, you know, may have some things to say, whether it's like Chris Nolan or, you know, Alex Garland is a favorite of mine, just, you know, not being afraid of telling deep, interesting stories. Still, to me, I think to tell those stories, the pitfall is not being character centric and character focused. And that's, you know, that's what I'm just constantly trying to figure out for the projects I'm trying to make. But I think, you know, that's the trick of it, is to and especially as independent filmmakers, this is the time when you can do that. You don't have a studio giving you notes. You know, you can make the thing that you want to make and see how it sticks. And that's why guys like Nolan and Villeneuve, his science fiction films, obviously big studio pictures, but, you know, they allow for the cerebral nature of what I think many people would like to see and are looking for more of. And I think that's just great, and to take advantage of that. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, when we made some of the TV documentaries that we produced and directed, we worked with space scientists from the Apollo program, engineers and stuff. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience to talk. I mean, just absolute dream. You know, they screened the documentaries at certain societies like the British Interplanetary Society and other science societies in the UK. And one of the pieces of feedback that we heard quite often was like, thank you for not dumbing it down, because, you know, in particular, there was a documentary we did about Apollo 13, and it went into real detail about the steps that got the astronauts home. You know, it was a sense of like, if you've seen the movie, dig in, you know, let's really learn like the science behind how they got home. And yeah, the feedback, people were just really happy to be able to sink into that world and understand it in more detail. And I think that goes for narrative movies as well. With Cosmos, a lot of people have gone like, there was lots of science in that film, but like I really enjoyed it. And I've since gone and I've bought myself a telescope, or I've looked into radio astronomy, and people do really connect with that. Obviously, some people don't, but that's okay.
Yeah, but when you put those details in that you've thought through, I think especially today's contemporary audience has a very good, not to use the vernacular, BS meter. They know when you're sort of skating over things. And I think, for argument's sake, the touches that you've both done in your films where things are rooted in real science, even in the narrative structure, those little details really help. And, I think that the idea, like going way back, of just sort of throwing a bunch of technobabble, expository stuff at the camera doesn't really work anymore. You really have to think through things, and that's good, So, and people want that. They want to know that they're being respected as an audience, as a viewer. Yeah,
that's actually interesting about the technobabble thing, because of the Beyond was pretty much it's kind of like a fake documentary. We're following the lives of the physicists, the scientists, and so on. And then there's one sequence where we go into the physicist's house because he's like got a theory about, why the astronauts came through the wormhole so early. And I remember our production designer was like, okay, well, we kind of need some stuff all over the desk and on the wall. And instead of putting some random technobabble, I'm like, no, let's physically look at these physics, Kip Thorne's physics books, and really just replicate those pages. And on the computer screen, don't have some random wireframe, have an actual proper simulation what a wormhole would look like. There's tons of stuff on NASA you can download. They put their simulation graphics online. I don't have to, as a VFX artist, I don't have to create that stuff. So we put it in there, and when you see loads of feedback on IMDb comments saying, oh wow, we may not have agreed with the plot, but my God, the detail was so cool that I paused it and looked at stuff. And as a filmmaker, you feel kind of proud. You're like, oh my God, I'm respecting the community, I'm respecting the science, but the Weaver brothers and Adam, what you guys are saying is respecting the audience, giving them some credit that they can use their minds,
Couldn't agree more. I mean, we were watching a film last night and we were having a good old chuckle because, like what Adam said, it's so the sort of the techno bab, like the 90s, classic 90s movie where some scientists is just sort of hand waving, and it's great. I love it because it's it is what movies were of that time. But you do sometimes think now that doesn't fly anymore. And if you go there, you probably will get called out on it. But
well, we live in a time, now where you can access this content forever. It's not like you've seen it in the cinema and you can't, or you have to wait till it's on TV and then you have to record it onto VHS or whatever, or buy it when it comes out and the quality's not great. It's in HD up front, and people can watch it as many times as they want and pick it apart. And actually, I think people enjoy, like I said, the process of really involving themselves in movies and documentaries in the sci-fi genre. I think maybe sci-fi has that more than any other genre.
So if I can just summarize what you just said. So one element is obviously the character or the protagonist. Focus on that. So it needs to be character driven. The second thing was it needs to don't dumb it down. So it needs to have good science. And the third thing was accessibility, I believe, if I can summarize that. Have it accessible to people to watch.
I also think what's interesting about science fiction is that the greatest works of science fiction, whether it be in film or literature, have also been by people who have just not abided by any rules. They've come up with interesting ideas themselves. They've been inspired by things from outside of cinema or outside of literature, and I guess the counter to the rule system is also don't be afraid to come up with some crazy idea that nobody else has explored, and in that way, you actually will be contributing something really quite. I guess as a filmmaker, you're always trying to make sure you're making something that's worthy of the time, and if you're lucky enough, the financial investment that people have made in your project, that's precious. They could just be watching something else. So if they're watching your thing, you want to at least offer them something. And if you can offer them something, a truly unique experience, then that really is the gold that we're all trying to mine.
Yeah, I mean, definitely echoing what you're saying there, guys, in terms of science fiction and the rules. I guess maybe, if we dig it down on a granular level, there's grounded science fiction and then there's fantastical science fiction. And that's a whole different conversation, but it all stems down to rules. For the Beyond, our rule was to make it as grounded as possible so that the audience really believe, just like the short film, when the short film came out, we had loads of comments on YouTube saying, oh my God, did NASA really put a human consciousness in a brain? And we make, like, you get people asking those questions. It felt very real and documentary, right? A lot of people from Texas, I think. But anyway, but the point is, with the feature, you had to kind of stick with, that was our rule, is keep it grounded. But the minute we went into, without spoiler alert, into the alien world, there is no rules. That's the beauty of science fiction. It allows you to expand your horizons and do things that you couldn't do on a traditional drama or a thriller or a rom-com, where you're expected to have reality. And, you know, the laws of physics may be bent and twisted when you're on the other side of the wormhole, you know. And that's, I think that's the beauty of science fiction, is you have your set of rules, like, you know, your core fundamentals in terms of like, what is your character arc and your, you know, the inciting incident, the motivation, all of that, right? Which, you know, structure. But in terms of like, as world building, oh my God, science fiction is like the king genre for world building. And I think filmmakers should embrace that. And all of our favorite filmmakers, you know, people on this call now, we all embrace world building. That's the idea of science fiction.
Yeah, that's huge. I would just add to that as well. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that the important thing, you know, you touched on this idea has, you know, the rules of your world. I think, yeah, not to constrain yourself and to allow yourself to really explore anything. I would only add that I feel like it's important to, once you've established those rules, to stick to them. And I think that goes back to sort of the respecting the audience perspective of it, that, you know, don't break your own rules, because people then you'll get called out right away again. It's like, establish it and figure it out and go as big as you want to possibly go. But then, you know, go with your own logic, as opposed to using, you know, things to story constructs to, you know, get you out of trouble. It's like, really think it through. And I think the more time you can spend making your film before you actually go to camera, whether that's, you know, conceptual design and previs and the writing and the thought, the better, because that's when you really get to make the film for the first time before you're actually making the film, and to really think through those rules and you know, to try to stick to them yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said there, Adam, about like, you know, making the film before you make the film. Like, you know, everyone does it. I know the Weaver brothers, like, huge fan of your storyboards, by the way. Oh my God, your storyboards are friggin' epic. I love your storyboards. But like, I can't draw to save my life. I'm like, you know, so I resort to things like previs, but I wouldn't sit there and spend like 8 months previs in the entire movie, not something like The Beyond, right? So what I did was I did table reads, and that's a very, very powerful thing, like doing table reads. And I remember we did the first table read of all the actors and some of the production people. And out of that table read, everyone's like, I have no idea what I'm saying. Like, I'm saying all this stuff as scientists, but I don't know what quantum physics is. I don't know about quantum entanglement. Like, what is this? And that made that really concerned me as a filmmaker. I'm like, oh my God, like, if I'm making like this grounded characters, and people have to believe that that they're saying this stuff and not just acting it out like some cheesy B movie or something, then I really got to fix this. And that is where you make the film before actually making it. And I remember taking a break. We stopped production, like, you know, we stopped the pre-production for like 2 months or something. And I spent time making little homework packs for each of my cast. So, you know, you're a quantum physics, you are running the space station, you're an astronaut, you are a press junkie, you are all of those, and read this stuff. And then we'll have a workshop session. And then we end up rewriting the script based on the workshop session. And when the actors were talking, they were talking based on what they understood what quantum entanglement was, based on the homework I gave them. And it made the performance so much believable. It gave them much more free reign. It had that very dogma vibe, you know, Danish approach to making films. And it had that, it just felt more freeing. And the actors themselves felt super comfortable because they can just like spitball based on the homework that they read. And that's super important. And like you said, like if we didn't take that process in making the film before making the film, we would have found that out on the day. And you can't waste time on the day. You know, time is money, and it's a luxury we don't have on the set, even if it's an indie film.
Let's now get a little bit more specific on short films. So this is to help people who are either doing films for the first time, or they're emerging filmmakers and they want to break into the industry. What are your advice in terms of short films and film festivals, submitting them to film festivals? Well, first of all, what are your advice in terms of making it with a limited budget? And then when it's submitted to the film festival, what are your advice on that to make it as successful as possible? And I'm interested to find out from you, Adam, how you promoted FTL to be so successful.
Oh, thanks. Well, yeah, it's had a really interesting run, FTL. It's been a fun film, and it's, you know, I'm sure that, you know, Haz and the Weaver brothers would probably agree with this. It's but I know for me, I find it you know, it's not easy to watch your own work after a little while, because you see all of the things that you wish you could have either done differently or changed, or you've grown, and, you know, and all of those kinds of things. So it's been great seeing it out there and do really well. And at the same time, I'm like, but wait, I could do more, you know, or better. But yeah, it's had a great run. And I think that when I came into getting FTL out there after we'd made it, I had taken at the time a relatively traditional approach, which was to sort of, you know, see where it fit with film festivals and to go from there. And so, you know, from the perspective of how to have as much success as with that as possible, I certainly targeted festivals that I felt would be a good fit for the film and where audiences would appreciate it. So, you know, certainly, you know, I submitted to most of the sci-fi festivals I was aware of, and some of the bigger ones otherwise. And it ended up playing at many, many festivals. It did really well. And I had a really fun year with it, going, you know, touring it around and premiering it. Actually, it premiered at Sci-Fi London. I love those guys. And you know, it's always fun to do stuff there. But all that being said, a year went by, and people knew about the film that had seen it, but, you know, short films and film festivals can, you know, certainly have a self-limiting audience just by the pure nature of the physicality of it. And so after a year, it was time to put it online, because at the time, film festivals were still saying, you know, most of them I think have changed a little bit now, but they were still saying at the time, you know, you can't have it online before you know, have it in the festival. Really, a year later is when it took off like a bullet, when I put it online. And it really made me rethink what I would do now. And now I'm moving into features. And so I'm not going to be, I don't believe, you know, putting any more shorts out there. But for a short film today, I would think very seriously about having an online presence as early as possible, as long as the festivals that you're working with are okay with that. Because after it being on Vimeo for a week, I didn't even put it on YouTube. I was getting calls from, you know, literary managers and people in Los Angeles that wanted to talk. Where a year had gone by, where it was at festivals where, you know, no one knew it existed other than the people that were in those rooms at the festival. So, yeah, I mean, and not to speak, and you know, I know, you know, you have a festival coming up, so I'm not trying to sound negative about festivals, because I think it's still really important that people go out and as communities and see films together and have the opportunity to also, as a filmmaker, to see your film with an audience. But the online component was really where it went for me. And then when FTL went on to Dust, it started generating the millions and millions and millions of views, which changed a lot of things for me. So yeah, I think from a strategic perspective, I would probably these days look at what festivals I could work with while also having an online presence, not a year later, like within a reasonable amount of time. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. And that's a very good point. And that's one of the things that I suggest to submitters. Well, SFC Films Film Festival is both online and it's actually a physical festival. The only caveat is that, like, you know, it's behind a membership line, but it's non-exclusive. So that means you can submit it to other film festivals. And I actually encourage people to submit it to as many film festivals as they can, both online and physical, and check to see if they do require exclusivity. Because if they do, they're usually harder to get into anyway, to have it screened. But also that non-exclusivity limits you from having your film online, and having it online is very important, as Adam has mentioned. So that's something that I'm also working towards, is having a collaboration with other film festivals. So there's the Sydney Sci-Fi Film Festival that I'm having a chat with. So if you submit it to either one of us, you automatically submit it to both. So that's one thing that I've noticed is there is a lack of collaboration between the film festivals. So that's something that I'm trying to remedy at my level. Obviously, I'm not at the Cannes level or anything like that, but like at my level, at least we have like several sci-fi film festivals collaborating with each other. So yeah.
I think that's really important. Like, it's great to hear that that's part of your remit for your festival, and because I think it's very filmmaker facing, and I think Adam's spot on. I think we are festivals used to hold a certain position in the filmmaking process because they were the only way of getting a film in front of audiences. Like, you make a movie 20 plus years ago, how are people going to see it if they don't get to go and watch it in a room, or it gets shown on television, or they pick up a DVD somewhere? I don't know. How are you going to get a short film in front of people? So I think it's, now we're in this incredibly empowering, liberating zone as filmmakers where we have festival options, but we also have our own options of screening and showing online and building an audience. And so I think if festivals can kind of blend with that experience and allow filmmakers to do their own thing and be involved in certain events and stuff, I think that's the kind of golden ticket, really. I think it's really, really important. Otherwise, festivals, they're actually holding filmmakers back. They are limiting their reach. They're limiting their ability to get to audiences, which is the complete opposite of the purpose of a festival.
That also, festivals will lose their relevance if they don't.
I agree.
If they don't change. Like Zander said, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you made a short film or a feature film and you wanted to do something more with that, if you wanted to get to distribution, you would meet those distribution contacts at a festival, and that's just not necessary anymore. You can reach those distribution contacts through other avenues. So festivals have to evolve in order to keep their relevance. And I think by becoming more of, and it's interesting what, Adam, you mentioned doesnt. It's interesting what doesnt have created. They've sort of created this community that almost feels quite festival-like. It's like, a new release, It feels like a community of sci-fi lovers, but it's not festival-facing, but it almost feels like where festivals could lead to. So I think the idea of basically giving filmmakers everything they need to keep making movies. And I think one of the things we found with Cosmos, we didn't have any festival success with Cosmos. We made a film that we tried to submit to a certain tier of festival. We were like, okay, we're trying to get to distribution, so let's submit to the South by Southwest, let's submit to the Slam Dances. And we were just flat out rejected from all of these festivals for reasons that are obvious, because a lot of these festivals have started turning their attention to sort of more of the studio level indie movie that, if you've got Bradley Cooper in it, then that's fantastic. And that's great, but it feels in a way that there's a certain genre, there's a certain tier of festival that have turned their backs a little bit on the filmmakers and have tried to turn their festival into a business. It's like, we'll sell tickets, people will come and watch the movies, we want the best movies we can get. So if you've got a star in your movie, that's fantastic, because people will come and will make money off the festival. And I think that's wonderful, because these people have to make money, they have to earn a living. It all has to, like the movie industry, has to be self-sustaining. But some of those festivals that started out as small, really grassroots indie affairs have grown and somewhat feels like they've turned their back on where they've come from. So I think, younger festivals can learn from that. And I think if they can remain the friend of the filmmaker and the friend of the film fan, then there's this wonderful new era of festivals that will just be a lovely ecosystem for filmmakers and film lovers alike.
And taking advantage of these communities, there is such a community with science fiction film lovers really embracing that, in that process.
Festivals can they can do the online equivalent now of what they used to be great at. It's like, offer a platform, build an audience and pull the audience to your festival in a way that exposes these films to audiences around the world. And I think it's a very exciting, when you think of it like that, I think it's a very exciting period of time for festivals, actually.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like, it's interesting because, like, it's going to sound bad as well, but I wasn't a big fan of sending my stuff to festivals. Like, you know, for all the reasons that we've just all said, like, you know, first I have to pay a submission fee. There's no guarantee my film's going to be screened, and I have to pay that. And it may not sound a lot for, like, I don't know, £4, £7, 20 quid, early bird submission. It may not sound a lot, but if you're submitting to like 20 festivals, it adds up for an independent filmmaker. So for me, what was very interesting, and this is where the positive of the festival comes in, was I released Project Kronos on Vimeo, straight to Vimeo. And, you know, it got a Vimeo staff pick. And the minute it gets a Vimeo staff pick, it's like, whoa, much bigger. And that's like Adam, like the Weaver brothers, like, you know, you get the phone calls from Hollywood. But then what became very interesting is the festivals then called me up and said, hey, we'd love to screen your film, but could you come down and do a Q&A? And that, to me, is the power of festivals, where you screen a film to the audience. Now, that film obviously is already online, so the audience are like, well, I can watch it online. But the bonus you're saying is you get to have a Q&A session with the filmmaker. And a lot of times when I go to festivals, or used to go to festivals, I would go there because I get to meet the filmmakers or have a Q&A session, or you get to hear the story of how this film was put together straight after watching the movie. That's an experience a festival gives really well. So, you know, that's how I've always done my stints. And it's interesting that, you know, people like Louis Savvy, who we all know from Sci-Fi London, it was a similar thing. He saw my shorts, go, hey, listen, I know your stuff's out there, but yeah, I don't think there's enough British filmmakers doing this kind of crazy robot on a bike, you know, my third short Sync. Can you come down and do a Q&A? And it was amazing to go down there and see audiences and see other filmmakers as well that you could just talk to. And that, I think, festivals should still have that. I know it's a bit tricky now because of the pandemic, but yeah, there's a version of that online I think we can do as well, that we still have that same effect.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, actually, just with mentioning Louis, just to think about that, you know, one of the things that I loved about when I took FTL to Sci-Fi London is Louis was very particular about arranging for opportunities for the filmmakers to all spend time together. So, you know, I had this great experience, this goes back a few years, where, you know, we spent the day together. I met all these filmmakers that I'm still in touch with all over the world. We spent, you know, I don't know, several hours on a boat going to Greenwich and having lunch together and all this kind of stuff. And that made the experience, you know, and I think festivals embracing that idea of really, you know, figuring out how to get filmmakers together so they have the opportunity to talk. Also, other than, you know, doing Q&As with audience, which I think is a big benefit has, as you've said. Those things, it's that community building stuff and the opportunity for filmmakers, not just to show your film in front of an audience, but to get out there in the world of the community that you're working within.
Since I've got this wonderful VFX artist, might as well ask you guys the VFX question. How do we make our VFX look real? With limited budget.
Reference.
I've got an easy answer. Own a visual effects company.
Yeah.
That's easy. Yeah, good one.
That's one thing. So I've been lucky enough to be next door to the Academy of Interactive Entertainment. So they have VFX students. So for my next film, some of the students agreed to work on my film. So I've been lucky there. But for some of our viewers, they may not be so lucky, and they might like get in there and install Blender or whatnot, and they're totally overwhelmed. What do I do now? So what do you suggest how they go about? And sci-fi, you got to have VFX in sci-fi. You can't just not have VFX.
You know, you have to have them. You know, well, I guess you don't have to have them, but it's, you know, it's certainly something that it's good to have in your arsenal. And, you know, I mean, being mostly facetious about, you know, I feel, you know, I've had this tremendous advantage in that, you know, I've spent many years in visual effects. I know has as well. All that being said, though, and I saw the end of your credits, Elliot and Zander, on Cosmos, you know, a big shout out to Blender. I think that this world is also changing so extensively. I am working really hard to move my visual effects company's pipeline towards tools like Blender and away from some of the big boys, because it's so democratizing. It's so powerful. You can do so much. You don't need to spend tons of money to have great visual effects, but you better learn how to use the stuff properly. And then the big trick is really understanding photography. And, you know, I'm sure we're all familiar with Stu Maschwitz and all of his work on his own and with Red Giant and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things he said years ago that really stuck with me was, you're not trying to simulate reality. You're trying to simulate what a camera sees reality as. And, thinking photographically, really trying to understand the image, and then doing things like some of the best visual effects are the ones that, you just don't know are visual effects, whether it's a night sky replacement or adding the stars or, those kinds of things can really enhance a project, and they're not hard to do, but understand how they work and put the time in, and then study the photography, not real life necessarily. That would be my 2 cents on that. Yeah.
You can also get a bit overwhelmed in visual effects by saying, oh, let's stick a green screen everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I remember we were shooting we had this big NASA, we simulated what a NASA room would look like. So we had tons of monitors. In fact, it was the University of Birmingham we shot that. So the Weaver brothers would be familiar.
I know that. That's
but it was a huge room. We had tons of monitors. I remember the DP and the production designer said, okay, let's put a green graphic on all the screen and we'll replace it. I'm like, I've been a compositor for like 12 years, and I've been that guy in the basement working at MPC, rotoscoping all this stuff because someone stuck a green screen on a monitor because they thought it would help. No, what we did was we did the visual effects of all the graphics beforehand and just played them on the loop and adjust your refresh rate on your camera. Done. I've saved a shit ton of money on compositing, gave me the freedom to move my camera where I want, rack focus and stuff. That's another way of thinking about how you use visual effects. There is, like Adam was saying, how you use the tools and how you utilize visual effects, but there's also the other production side of things, which is like when to use visual effects smartly. Yeah. And as independent filmmakers, you got to think that even more than the big studio films.
Yeah, and don't hide behind, don't think that during production you can throw green screens everywhere. I think that's just to reiterate what you're saying, Has, because what you're doing is you're causing two issues. One, it's going to be hard to see your story as you're trying to put it together in editorial. And then you're dependent entirely on how good you can make the visual effects. And, we don't all have tons of time on the day to shoot perfect green screens as independent filmmakers. You're asking for trouble if you're relying on those. And one of the things that, I appreciate with all the filmmakers here is, you don't want to create the sense that you're hiding behind a color grade or you're hiding behind things because you haven't been able to get the quality up there. So it's really, again, it's about making the movie before you make it, thinking through this stuff, using visual effects as a tool, but not as a crutch. And that's really important. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are like two factors in like good visual effects. And like, one is knowing how to do them. It's like the technical ability. And the second is having the ability to actually like exercise the use of like your critical eye, right? So it's not just enough to know what buttons to push, know what modifiers to use, blah, 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 blah. You have to know that you have to be able to look at the work you're doing and find the flaws in it. You have to be able to look at your reference and look back at the effect that you're producing, look at your reference, look back. And actually that's not something that like people are familiar in doing, like we were both art students at school, and one of the first things you're taught is like draw what you see, not what you know. So don't fall back on like, oh, I know what this should look like. Off I go. Oh, I'm really happy with that, right? Continue to look at what you're trying to produce, get as much reference as possible, and practicing the use of that critical eye. I think it's something that's overlooked. You see
reference is king. And even if you're doing something fantastic, like in FTL, we were doing a spaceship that didn't exist or whatever, but the amount of NASA reference we had on the walls was extraordinary.
Yeah. So it's not just enough it's not just enough to know like how to do something. You got to, you've got all the tools, you've mastered them, right? You've invested all this time and money into getting good at it, but if you haven't also developed the ability to like look at something and then look at your work and see the difference, it's useless. It's literally useless.
So it's the same with photography. There's something Zander and I say to each other all the time, which is it's not enough for the camera to just see the action. Like that's boring. It's not. People think they put a camera on a tripod and they just let the camera see what's in front of them. Let the actors do their thing. You can do that, but it's not enough. That's not storytelling with a camera. The camera has to say something without words. It's saying something to an audience more than what they're seeing. It's not enough for the camera to just see it. And it's the same with visual effects. It's not enough for it to just be there. It's got to be enhancing your story. The audience can know it's a visual effect, or they can know it's not a visual effect. It's when we did Cosmos, it's quite funny because people would go, oh, you know, this driving sequence, you did the poor man's process. Like, were you sure that was going to happen? And Zander and I were always like, you know, when they made Interstellar, they didn't really take Matthew McConaughey to space. Like, that's a poor-man process. Like, that was done in the studio. It's just because you're not driving a car out in the real world doesn't mean it's not going to work. So, yeah, I think having an overall understanding of the filmmaking process and how visual effects marry in, and when you can get away with doing something practical, like Has said, or the combination of having something on a screen but film it in camera. And particularly like Adam's the one you want to listen to. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to visual effects. And
well, as does Has, and as do you guys. I mean, seeing what you did with Cosmos. I mean, and I see, and you know, the stuff that you're doing on that you're showing on your next project. I mean, you know, I think everyone here has certainly a significant visual effects knowledge, and I know, you know, Has, you have a long background in feature work, and I think, you know, there's a lot to take from that, but it's not a barrier to entry. I don't think. I think, you know, one of the great things that's happening in the world right now is you can go online and you can get all of this incredible software. It's very powerful. So that's not the excuse. The excuse is not the excuse, but the thing that people should be doing is using their eyes and studying the world around them. And, you know, you can learn the tools, you know, but that's the important stuff for sure. Yeah.
Also, like, the thing about I found with visual effects is a lot of people worry about it being perfectly pretty. What I found with, even in my visual effects career as a VFX supervisor, I spent time talking to other directors, and a lot of times I learned from other directors. That's how I decided to step into the world of directing myself, by working with great directors and directors that were, you know, not so good because they were struggling with understanding the communication process in terms of visual effects. But one thing that I remember hearing was loads of directors going, I don't know what it is with that visual effects shot, which is something isn't right. And they couldn't put their finger on it. And it's usually because we've forgotten to make it imperfect. The imperfection layer, so you do your comp correctly, you do your lighting correctly, but then there's always this slight, you know, things like chromatic aberration, right? For those, you know, obviously we all know what chromatic aberration, but for the audience, it's like, you know, the edges of what the camera is picking with the sensor. The computer camera is perfect. It won't have what you have in a DSLR or Arri Alexa. So putting in imperfection, lens distortion, and all these things that we've all said is watching references, understanding a little bit about photography. But also spaceships, you know, since we're on this topic of spaceships, like, I love what you did with FTL, Adam, where, you know, some of your highlights were blown out. And that's exactly what a spaceship would look like. You would have blown out. If you look at NASA, they're not perfectly beautifully rendered. They are blown out, white, harsh light from the sun, because, you know, you got the stars, you got the sun. And so there's a bit of like looking at what reality, and let's face it, reality can be a bit boring. So obviously that's where we come in and heighten it a little bit. But I think as filmmakers using visual effects, it's a balancing act between reality and what looks cool. And that's always the job of that's our job as filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's an interesting thing. We got, I will say, there's also,
What's he doing?
I'm off here. Like, what's he doing? When to use visual effects and not to use visual effects. So in Cosmos, for example, there's a shot.
This is technically a visual effect.
But this is just not a computer visual effect. There's a shot in Cosmos where we push in on one of the characters looking out the window, and then we wanted the moon reflected in the window, and we just printed out the moon on a piece of paper, put it on a stand and shot a light at it, and actually got the reflection of the moon in the glass. And then as the glass, you know, was imperfect, like Has said, or as the glass curved into the frame of the car, and as the reflection of the moon transitioned off the glass and onto the chassis, the metal, it warped and changed. And that was just, this is the back of a cereal packet with the moon printed on it, you know? And we just stuck it up on a stand and pointed a light on it and got the reflection. And to create that in visual effects, or, you know, to get a visual effects artist to create that in a computer, that's a lot more time consuming and a lot more costly than just, you know, printing out something on a Cheerios box. So sometimes, I mean, maybe you can't always do it that way, but that's one way of doing it.
Well, and with all sincerity, I remember that shot in your film. Because I remember looking at it and going, and I was thinking to myself, you know, if that's a visual effect shot, that's really freaking good. Because, you know, as it went through the aberrations of the glass, and I'm like, how did they track that in there? You know, so...
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Thank you.
The cat's out the bag now. Yeah.
That's so cool.
I think that's also part of
Wonderful.
the fun of filmmaking, isn't it? The magic trick of it sometimes, the fooling one another, fooling the audience.
Yeah.
You know, as filmmakers, we get kicks out of, you know, how can we get away with, it's not make-believe, it's not real, it's make-believe. We're shaking the car and we're going to add the sound effects later or whatever. But when it sells, that's where we get our kicks. We sit in post and we go, wow, this works. You know?
Yeah, and I think you can also, on the topic of visual effects, like I think you can achieve a lot if you plan, you know, if you very specifically think about how you want visual effects to be incorporated into your film, you can make life firstly a lot easier, but you can also you know, use tricks and cheat it a little bit. You know, if the shot was more complex, maybe this wouldn't have worked, but it was a pretty simple shot and therefore it's perfect for what we need. So don't go for the super complex shot if it's not necessary. Like pick and choose your fights and figure out where is the right time to go hard on it and create something spectacular, and where is like a place that you can do something a bit easier, make life easier for yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, guys. We might end the first half there, just for the viewers on YouTube, on the live stream. We're going to stop the live stream now, but join us again next month. So this is the first one of this type of event that I've organized. So what I'm planning to do is have one of these type of events every month. So 1 month will be the film industry, another month will be the space industry. So next month we'll be talking to several women who are in the space industry and how we can encourage more women to take up professions in the space industry, as well as sci-fi films, I guess, but mainly in the space industry. So join us for that. So to join us, you can go to www.sfcfilms.space and click on the events tab.